All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to World Bible School Media. This is Dr. Bill, and you are watching Friday Morning Conversations. Each week on this broadcast, we bring you teachings or concepts which are beyond what is often considered normal in Christian conversation, so that we can discover more of the eternal Christ who is within us, even from before the foundation of the universe. Today with me is my friend and my brother Bob Ingle, who is an apostle of the Lord, who writes. I was raised a Southern Baptist. I was a faithful follower who rededicated my life many times. Man, I can bear witness to that. I really wanted to get it right until I saw it wasn't. I became faithful to other things. In retrospect, I was always looking for truth, and that man, that's my heart and my passion right there. I found true love and true friends, but in July of 1977, sitting on a bed with a pistol in my hand, I said, God, you're going to have to help me. I can't handle this anymore. And I had a profound experience. We're going to be talking a little bit about those type of experiences. He says, I went to the only place I knew to go, church. It was during our evangelical years, 1978 through 2010. I taught Sunday school, attended deacons meetings, played on worship teams. I served as an elder, Sunday school superintendent, and was heavily involved in prison ministry and hospital visitation. My wife, Flo, he says, operated a regional Bible study tape lending library and was a volunteer church secretary. We devoted our vacations to handing out gospel tracts and at multiple Mardi Gras and the 96 Olympics. For many years, we were 20% givers. Flo and I were ordained in 1984. We never pastored, but I preached many times. I wrote, recorded, played music, performed, and formed a band. Here's the name of this band: the Grateful Dead. I'm sorry, the Grateful Saved. The Grateful Saved. I'm so familiar with the Grateful Dead. The Grateful Saved. I served on local international church boards, church plants, and worked with full-time and bivocational pastors. And there is much more. And that's my statement because I just that was a lot to say right there. You can read more about his articles on his blog page by Apostle Bob at www.unheardwords with a Z instead of an S.com. And I'll be sure to get that posted throughout the our time together today. Apostle Bob, and he said it's okay if I call him Apostle or call him brother. He is most definitely my brother. Welcome to Friday Morning Conversations. I'm so glad you're here.
It's good to be here, Bishop. And it was interesting that you pointed out that we're going to talk about things that are not normally talked about. I think I'm more comfortable being called abnormal than I am apostle, but you call me what you want to. I'm good with either one. Okay.
Abnormal Bob Ingle.
Right.
That's yeah.
I think you'd have no trouble getting multiple testimony that would work. Okay.
Yeah, I hear you. Anyway, yeah, and I say apostle, not because we've discussed that or pre-planned that, but because this guy actually has been involved in so many things. I just see an apostolic work, an apostolic labor, and I really have an appreciation for him. So, for the sake of his writings, I know he'd be more comfortable if I just say Bob Ingle, his um, blogs and there you go. There it is, and you can pull that up. You can read his blogs, and they're very short, very readable, very digestible. So we're talking about, and this is just week one of the next 3 weeks, talking about Epiphany. Now, Epiphany is really such a short title, but it really says a lot if you understand the word Epiphany, and I will explain just a little bit. But first of all, let me just give you a scripture, and I have a couple of a statement made by this guy that I think that will give him plenty of stuff to talk about, and it will bless you. John 12 verse 32. Let me just put this up on the screen for everybody. John 12:32, the New King James Version says, "And I, if I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all peoples to myself. That's an interesting wording compared to the King James Version, which is not that much different, but I love this, the plural of all peoples. So I will draw all peoples to myself. And that's
Mhm.
what's happening in this man, my guest, that he is saying things and doing things and having conversations that's drawing people to Christ himself. Epiphany basically means an awakening or a manifesting of the revelation of Christ happening to us and within us in many ways. The fact is that Epiphany in its simplest form is purely a manifestation. But here's the real statement. It really is it's a life in moment. It's real life it's happening at that moment, and we want to explain what that means. But first of all, let me just read this statement. My guest Bob Ingle says this: my Jesus Epiphany came 15 years ago, and I know that date could change at different times we have him on the show. He said, but it came 15 years ago this week in a in a popular brew pub in midtown Kansas City. This is not the first time I've heard testimonies like this. You ought to hear the late apostle or pastor Paul Gray, many testimonies like this. The incense was cigarette smoke and the communion in a skillet. The wine was IPA. I have no idea what IPA means. And
It's a
the
kind of
worship.
beer, Bishop. It's a kind of beer.
Okay.
All right.
I'm a virgin when it comes to the worship team. Pandora. The congregation was tattooed and pierced. In the middle of a conversation, I heard myself quoting Jesus. If I be lifted up from the earth, I'll draw all men to myself. In a moment, everything changed. I realized church as usual wasn't lifting up the real Jesus to the real world. I realized I'd been shown something very different. I was forever changed. I suddenly understood mankind, created in the image of God with all his potential, was searching for far more than the slavery resulting from the systemic sermon series that spins and respins Genesis 3, and we love Genesis 3. But he goes on to say, it became clear Jesus came to free generations, not to weigh them down with the guilt of a message that is continually an accuser of our brothers and sisters, Revelation 12, and wear them down on a never-ending journey up and down the Roman road. If you've ever been a good Baptist, I want to tell you, you understand the Roman road. And as a Pentecostal boy, we've dealt with that Roman road. So we were talking just the other day about having an epiphany, an awakening. And it sounds to me like you had such an awakening that is mind-blowing. It's the type of awakening that some people don't experience for years. So while this is a mouthful that I just read, please talk to us about this and give us some context here about your experience.
Bishop, I think I've probably lived an epiphany-driven life.
Mm-hmm.
The first sort of epiphany that I remember in my life had nothing to do with religion at all. There was a great music teacher when I was in junior high, a man named Lowell Fleener, and he had me playing upright bass in the junior high orchestra, and we were doing a show tune, an old show tune called "Me and My Shadow." And he came to me one day and he said, "Come down to the music room a little early today. I want to show you something." And so, man, this guy was my hero. I loved what he did, and he was musically talented, and I was quite taken by that. So I showed up down at the music room early, and he said, "Get your bass and your sheet music and come down by the piano." And I got my music and my bass and went down to the piano. And he sat down at the piano and he started playing "Me and My Shadow." And he said, play your what your sheet music chose you to play that part. I was playing along with him. And then he stopped and he said, "Now put away your music and play what you hear."
Come on. That's good.
And I could play it. I could hear it. That was a life-changing moment for me in a lot of ways. I've played music ever since then, and most of it not with sheet music. But I played forever. And if you want to hear some of my stuff, you can go out to Bob Ingle on Bandcamp. It's all free. You're welcome to download it, listen to it, do whatever you want to. It's some recordings that I made a few years back of some things I wrote. There's a couple of projects, about 21 or 22 tunes out there. But I think I was in contact with Mr. Fleener's daughter. She and I graduated from high school, and I recently wrote her a personal message. and related that story to her. And I said, that's been a map of my life. From that point forward, I can see time after time after time where I've kind of played what I heard, what I hear. And that opens me to epiphanies. That opens me to a realization of things. I certainly, if not the most importantly, one of the most important epiphanies in my life was in a garage behind the fraternity house. We were out in the garage because they wouldn't let us have beer in the house, so we had a refrigerator in the garage. And a group of girls showed up, and one sat down across from me, and I looked in her eyes and said to myself, well, that's the girl out of this group I'm going to end up with, thinking that was for the evening. She just left for the grocery store. That was in April 1964, by the way, and we've been a couple for 57 years and married 56, and that was an epiphany. That was a life-changing moment in my life, a realization that I'd found someone that was very special to me. Mm-hmm. The epiphany that you referred to, our son worked in this brew pub, the most popular brew pub in Kansas City, a place called McCoy's. Named after, by the way, a surveyor that surveyed Kansas City, whose name was John Calvin McCoy. It's very interesting that his parents had named him after John Calvin. Yeah. But we're at McCoy's, and on a Friday evening, very cold Friday evening, we're in the smoking section, and we weren't actually seated. We were kind of sitting on stools at the leaner bar. And a young woman came over to me. She was wearing a slinky black dress. She had piercings and a lot of tattoos. And her hair was all spiked up. She was carrying a drink. She was carrying a cigarette. And she said, she came over and said, I understand you're John's folks. And I said, yeah, this is Flo and I'm Bob. And I said, what's your name? And she said, I'm Cordy. And I said, well, tell me about yourself, Cordy. Where are you from? And she said, well, I'm from Arkansas. And I said, this is 2008. I said, wow, your former governor is running for president. Tell me about him. And she did about 5 minutes of very uncomplimentary, no expletives deleted description of this right-wing hypocrite. And when she stopped, I said, Cordy, I don't think I'd ever quoted this scripture to anybody before in my life, John 10. I said, Cordy, Jesus said, if I be lifted up from the earth, I'll draw all men unto me. Will you forgive me for being part of the generation that hasn't lifted the real Jesus up to your generation? Wow. And she stopped for a minute and looked at me. And then she said, I have a twin sister. My twin sister's gay, but she has more tattoos than I do because she'll sleep around with the tattoos guys to get free ink. She tried to gross me out. And I let her talk. And when she got done, I said, Cordy, will you forgive me? And that child took hold of me like a life preserver in a hurricane and said, nobody's ever talked to me that way before. And I said, Cordy, I didn't know what I was going to say to you. That was God talking to you. It turns out, after more conversation, that Cordy was a disillusioned YWAMer. She'd grown up in a Baptist church, as a matter of fact, and was completely turned off by what was going on. On the way home that night, I stuck my sleeve over in front of Flo, and you could smell the cigarette smoke on it. And I said, do you smell that, baby? And she said, yeah. And I said, that's the smell of the new church we're involved in. Now, that was in 2008. And it took a couple of years for the Lord to get me where I needed to get to be able to do that. But among other things, for 5 years, every Monday night, starting in the fall of 2010, every Monday night for 5 years, I'd be at McCoy's. Never took a Bible. Never went with an agenda. We didn't have a church service. I would go there and be there available to talk to people. Sometimes I'd end up talking one person at the bar, and sometimes there'd be a table with a dozen people. It became a pretty regular thing that there were anywhere from a half a dozen to a dozen people. And we would talk about life. You can't really talk about life very long without scripture coming in, because it's got the answers to life. So that great epiphany, that I love the definition that you read of an epiphany. And I think an epiphany goes beyond any religious implications. I think it's when a whole bunch of things, different experiences and exposures and upbringings and all kinds of things that make up your life. I think when all of a sudden those things will all come together and give you a crystallized focus of something that you needed to see, and they're always life changing. But I'm still going through life doing what Mr. Fleener told me to do. I put away my sheet music and I'm playing what I hear. And so that's opened me up to a lot of epiphanies, Bishop.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think an epiphany is life that happens when you least expect it. And
I did not expect to quote the book of John at the Leaner Bar in McCoy's on a cold Friday night. I absolutely didn't expect to do that. Had no idea that I would do that. Didn't have it even remotely in my mind. You're exactly right. I did not expect to meet my soulmate for life sitting in a garage behind a fraternity house in April of 1964. I had no idea. And I've started companies based on epiphanies. I've had all kinds of things in my life that were based on the all of a sudden realization. A whole bunch of things came together and something became very, very clear. And in the dictionary, it actually, we'll talk about, they're usually simple and striking. All of a sudden, it's just something just, wow, why haven't I seen that before? But that's not really the question. The real question is, I see this now, what am I going to do with it?
Yes, absolutely. And you know, I remember as a young man, you know, my wife and I got married uh, 1973, January the 6th, 1973, and we were already children of ministers, and so we went right into ministry. We became youth pastors, but a couple of years later, we became senior pastors for the first time, 20 years old, and not knowing not knowing anything. I was definitely wet behind the ears. But one of the things was is I was such an anxious and nervous young man that I would make split second decisions. Whether I mean, so I wouldn't say that the Lord didn't direct me, but I would say I would just grab it and run with it. And one of the things I learned is because timing was off so many of those times, just like you didn't start when the Lord said, you know, this is the church you're going to start be a part of. It didn't start right away, but so in time I learned how to go to the Lord. When I would hear the Lord speak to me, I would say, okay, Lord, that's really cool. How do you want to do this, and when do you want to do this? And I became more attentive to what God was saying. And I do believe what you're saying. I think that we literally have failed to minister to people. Let me say it this way: we failed to be available to people that are not a part of our clique or our culture or our makeup. And for you to sit in a place where you're just available. Now that's pretty amazing. Uh, for me, we need to be a people who is willing to be set wherever it is that the Lord directs us. We need to be able to be patient. I mean, it's like if God says go there, the first thing we want to know is how large is the building and what does the pulpit look like? What exactly am I going to be doing? Instead of okay, God, I'll just go there and be available because you're right. Uh, uh, and I've got apostle locked into my mind, but you're right that we have not been available to the generations preceding us in many ways, and that's sad. But I'm so glad you have led us, set an example of how to correct that. So when we talk about an epiphany, we're talking about a divine awakening. We're talking about moments when life happens, just stuff happens. And I've heard so many stories for you, and I don't know if this is a good segue or not, but I've listened to your music, and you know, you don't you're amazing because you don't just do one genre of music. You've really encompassed all kinds, and I love that. Now I'm a rocker at heart, maybe even soft rock or or pop, but that's just kind of how I came up. And you even address that. You've got rock music, and I like James Taylor, and you do that kind of stuff. You've got some really neat songs. So I want to just ask you, because you talk about your band teacher, and you talk about the bass, but yet I heard you play some pretty mean guitar on your acoustic, and acoustic's kind of my heart. Um, but before I want to ask you to talk about what got you to there and what got you to the Grateful Saved, and what that experience was like as far as an epiphany is concerned. But before you do, can you give us that place where people can go and check out your music one more time? I want to put it in the chat room.
It's Bob Ingle at Bandcamp, Bandcamp. And there's no charge involved. It's no monetize. You can. I would ask you not to use the music for commercial purposes without my permission, but you use it freely all you want to. A brother reached out to me recently from St. Louis that ministers a lot and said, "Man, I'd love to use some of your tunes." I said, "Do it. They're recorded. Download them. Use them. You know, that's what they're there for. They were given to me freely. How could I sell them, right?"
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, Bob Ingle at Bandcamp, and it's obviously Bobingle. And I think going on in the future, you'll be able to search for me as Abnormal Bob Ingle, because we're we're going to give me that label. Yeah.
Abnormal Bob Ingle. As a matter of fact,
Yeah,
you'll type exactly those words, Bob Ingle at Bandcamp. You will. I just did it just to make sure nobody had any hangups with it, and I'm right there. The free download, play the music. It's right there.
If you Google Bob Ingle, if you just Google Bob Ingle music, it'll take you to that site too. So yeah, it's easy enough to find. So you want me to talk about how I got to there? Is that what you asked me, Bishop? I lost you. You just muted yourself.
Yeah, how you got there as far as moving from, you went from, because as a musician, I played bass. I understand moving from bass to guitar and the Grateful Saved, what that experience was like.
Well, it was interesting. I played bass, played upright bass originally, and when I got to college, there were a lot of people playing folk, and that worked really well. So I played bass, but to be honest, I took up guitar because I thought girls probably like guitar players better than they did bass players. Maybe, I don't know. I was drawn to the guitar. Let's put it that way, and started playing it. Got exposed to some good guitar work. Got around players that were better than I was, and the way I learned to play was I played with better players. You either get better or they kick you out of the band. So I never got kicked out of a band. The finger style, acoustic finger picking, attracted me a great deal, and I did that. Played a lot of that secular stuff. Again, was never in it for the money. I did play bass professionally for a few months in the winter, in a winter while I was in college, and remember looking out on a dance floor one evening, it was packed, and thinking, if I don't get out of here, I'll be here when I'm 50, and I love this too much to do it for a living. So I quit that band. But the music was always in my soul. I was told at one time while I was playing rock and roll, I tried to go back to church. I hadn't been in church in about 3 years, and I thought, man, I need to go to church. And I got up, put on a suit on a Sunday morning, and went to church, and got confronted in the lobby of the First Baptist Church of West Plains by a brother who said, "You went out and played rock and roll in a bar last night." And I said, "Yes, I did." And he said, "You have a choice to make. You can either go out and play rock and roll in a bar, or you can come to this church, but you can't do both." And I will tell you that rock and roll was a lot deeper in my soul than Calvinism. So I stepped back from that, but I kept playing music. When I had the experience in '77 that you described earlier, one of the things that I thought I needed to do was sell my guitar. Because based on what I knew, I couldn't play guitar and be a Christian.
Mm.
And Flo kept saying to me, is God telling you to do that? Is God telling you to do that? Well, he obviously wasn't. And in 1979, I went to a brother's house one evening. We were going to do a quartet thing in church on Sunday morning. And on a Friday night, I went to his house to rehearse. And he said, man, there's a radio station in Kansas City you need to listen to, KUDL. Well, I said, well, that's a secular station. I'd burned all my albums. I mean, I don't listen to secular music. He said, trust me on this. Go home and turn that station on. And I went home and turned it on, and it was part of Jimmy Swaggart's Sun Network that he did for a while. And all of a sudden I'm hearing Dallas Home and Don Francisco and Nancy Honeytree and Pat Terry Group and all those people. I want to tell you that when the mall opened on Saturday morning, I was there standing at the door of the Christian bookstore, and I bought every contemporary Christian album I could find because that released me. I met Nancy Honeytree once, and I said, sister, you saved me from a fate worse than choir practice. And she said, good grief, what's that? And I said, actually having to be in one, you know. But that released me to start playing, and I started covering people like Francisco and Home and those guys. In the summer of 81, I was asked to go to a youth lock-in at a church that I didn't go to, but the pastor came to me and said, would you come play guitar? And as I was getting out of my car, he'd come out the parking lot. I was getting out of my car, getting my guitar, and he said, man, I'm glad you're here. He said, Jimmy Bratcher's here. And I said, who's Jimmy Bratcher? He said, oh, he's a guitar player. And I thought, great. It's going to be some guy with a gut string that plays Blowing in the Wind or something. Well, Jimmy Bratcher, JIMMIEBRATCHER. Go out and find him. He's an absolute treasure, man. The Electric Rev. Preaching the gospel and playing the blues, and he's amazing. Jimmy and I played together in a group for several years called Unction. That was an acoustic group. Jimmy wrote most of the music at that time, and we switched off playing bass and guitar, and Kenny Price was our drummer. But we played in Unction. We were a house band in a small charismatic church, but we also played on the street. We used to play on the street for Brian Zahn when Word of Life Church was in a $7,000 building, and we'd be out in the parking lot on a flatbed trailer on Saturday afternoon playing concert for the crowds. But we played on the street. We played in jail. We played everywhere. I wrote a blog post about Kenny passed away several years ago, and I wrote a blog post, We Were Unction, that kind of describes that. But anyway, I continued to play music. I played with Jimmy for a while. In January of 94, we were in a church that we knew we couldn't stay in. I'd really sought the Lord. Matter of fact, Jimmy, who had been instrumental in us getting there, had left several months before. And at that time, I wanted to leave. The Lord said, no, the ship's in a storm. Don't leave a ship in a storm. That's mutiny. You wait till it docks, and then you can choose to whether to go back on it or not. And I woke up on January 25th of 94 at about 5 in the morning. And if I couldn't have found a pencil and a piece of paper, I would have exploded. And I wrote a song. I'd always been able to write chords and lyrics that rhyme, but I never could write a song because it was just words and music. It didn't say anything. But on that morning, I wrote, there comes a time when our relationships are altered by the Lord, when time as we've known it's come and gone, and when the path that's set before us is different than the past. And it's on that day we must be going on. And I called the pastor. We were having church that night, and I called the pastor. I said, Pastor, can I do a song tonight? And he said, sure. And went to church, and he never called on me, and it was all right. But afterwards, he came to me and said, man, he said, I forgot to ask you to do that song. And I said, can we come over to your house? And he said, sure. And I gave him the lyrics to that song, 3 verses and a chorus. He said, man, this is really good. And I said, it's God telling me it's time to leave here. And we did. Wandered kind of in the woods for about a month and ended up visiting a church. And a very prophetic man got up. The place was packed. I'm normally a second row on the aisle guy. We were on the row next to the back row in a crowded church, sitting in the middle. And he got up and he spoke a word over the pastor. And I knew the pastor, and I knew the word was valid. And then he turned to me, looked at me way back in the back of the crowd and said, "Your name's Bob, and you've been out in the woods for a long time."
Wow.
This man had I'd never met this man. I didn't even know I knew anybody that knew him. I had heard about him. I'd heard that he was a very prophetic guy, but I'd never had any contact of any kind with him. And he certainly didn't know that we lived dead in the center of a section of ground with timber all the way around us. And he said, "It's time for you to come out." He said, "There'll be those that tell you it's not, but you're in the right place at the right time." And we, of course, spent the rest of our church time in that church. But I got to the point where I was writing a song a week or more. I have a song on the acoustic project called "My Religion" that I literally wrote on the palm of my hand while I was driving in a fog on I-35 on the way to Des Moines to a business meeting. I couldn't stop. I had to get to the meeting, but I couldn't not write the song. So I guess that adds a whole new meaning to handwriting. But I literally wrote the song on the palm of my hand. And this music started happening, and I didn't know what to do with it. And I got some opportunities to play it. And I was at a pastor's meeting in Kansas City. This would have been in 97, probably. And a fellow that I knew that was a musician came to me and said, "There's a guy here you need to meet. His name's Carl Butler. He's a guitar player. He's a really good guitar player. You need to meet him." And I went over to this fellow and I said, introduced myself. I said, "I understand you're a guitar player." And he said, "Well," he said, "I throw a little mud up on the wall and see if it sticks." And I thought, this guy's trying to be humble. I said, "What kind of gear do you play, brother?" And he said, "Well, I've got a blackface Fender, a reverb, and a Gibson 335. And I said, "Dude, that isn't throwing it up on the wall gear. You're a serious player." Carl Butler, I said, "I've got some songs I don't know what to do with." He told me later, he said, "People come to me all the time and say that." And I said, "Gee, that's good. Glad you have songs." He said, "In your case, I felt something different." He said, "Come by, call me, and let's come by the church." He was pastor, he's associate pastor. He said, "Come by the church and I'll and play some of your music for me." And I did. And around that, great musicians. Carl had been a guy who made his living playing in bars before he really got touched by the Lord. He's an example. There's an old joke: the difference between a great guitar player and a large pizza is a large pizza can feed a family of 4. But Carl was a guy who actually made a living playing guitar. He was very talented. And I think people gathered around me more about getting to play with Carl than they did about my music. But the band came together. It was right about the time that Jerry Garcia passed away. And I'd never been a Grateful Dead fan, but the Lord spoke to me one day and said, "I want you to call this band the Grateful Saved." So we played together for about 10 years, and we played in almost every prison in the 2-state area. We didn't get in all of them. Played in the federal prison up at Leavenworth. We played in churches. We played on the street. When we played in prisons, by the way, we played in chapels, but we also got to play a lot on the yard, which is really where you want to be because everybody comes. Mm-hmm. We recorded. It was a great band. I had great players came around me, and so the Grateful Saved project, which is called "It's About Time," is that band. The other project, Jimmy took me aside and said, "I want to get some of your acoustic stuff down," and he brought in some good players. And in 2005, we recorded that project. Long answer to your question, but the Grateful Saved was an epiphany. It was an epiphany. The first song was an epiphany. Each song was an epiphany. Meeting Carl Butler, who, by the way, now has a work called the Gospel Lounge that is in an annex to the most popular biker bar in Kansas City called Knuckleheads. It's also the most popular blues bar in the region. Has all kinds of national acts that come through. And Brother Carl plays on Wednesday nights there, ministering to a crowd who doesn't feel welcome in a church. But they'll come to that bar and sit and hear what Brother Carl. I got to be in on the planning of that. I was on Carl's board when he put that together. And major acts who are booked into the Knuckleheads will call the owner, Frank, and say, "Frank, would you see if we could come in early and play the Gospel Lounge?" And they don't want to play it because there's money in it, because Carl doesn't pay them to play it. They want to play it because they want to play their music in that vibe. They want that spirit around them. Mm-hmm. Someone asked Carl, what are you going to do if somebody brings a drink into the gospel lounge? They come in from the bar and bring a drink. And he said, get them a coaster. Carl Butler's the man you need to know. And I'm talking to your audience.
Mm-hmm.
People who have stepped outside the box that were never meant to be in the first place. You know, the first thing that happened when the apostles got the filling of the Holy Spirit was they exited the building. They're all in that upper room, and all of a sudden they get the epiphany that we call the filling of the Holy Spirit. We call it the baptism of the Holy Spirit. We call it a lot of things. It is an eternal spiritual epiphany like no other. Mm-hmm. And the first thing they did was get out of the building and get out on the street. Out there, by the way, where the smell of the church is cigarette smoke, just like I told Flo years earlier. The Grateful Save happened for a time, and then a number of years ago, my hands started going numb, and I couldn't play guitar anymore. I could still play, but I'd play badly. And I've said many times, the world doesn't need another old bad guitar player. So I stopped playing. But fortunately, I had the music recorded. And that's when the Lord then showed me through Flo, by the way. She said, we need to be doing something like the tape lending library we used to have, or we need to use the internet to do it. And I immediately said, it's a blog, and it's called Unheard Words. Mm. And so we've been blogging for a long time. Now, I've got about 350 or 400 posts out there. I've kind of lost count. I think it's 358 or something. And again, those are free. Go read them. If they speak to you, share them. Do whatever you'd like to do with them. They just kind of chronicle. They kind of chronicle the continuing epiphanies that I have. I write those blogs when they are so prominent in me that I can't not write them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, let me just say this to everybody. I think that anytime you're a blog writer, or you write articles, or you write teachings with no place to teach it for the moment, or you write songs, if you struggle, if you're just like a Nashville songwriter, let's say, there's always the pressure to get the next song written. If you're under that kind of pressure, you're probably going to not write the next hit, first of all. But when you just have this moment of inspiration, an epiphany, and it's like, I didn't plan this, but boom, there it is. That's really a God thing, and that's when this awakening to something different that you didn't plan to say or do is right there. And I want to say that I have listened to all, if not most all, of the songs that you have written and that are on Bandcamp. And of course that you've sent me, and My Religion, really a great guitar piece there. And if it's okay, and you please, I don't have any other way to communicate with you except online. So if it's okay, maybe we can play a little bit of My Religion, maybe a minute and a half as we close. But if you'd rather me not, okay. I didn't think you'd mind that.
Be glad for you to do that. That, by the way. Players on that, Jimmy Bratcher does the electric. I do the finger pick and the acoustic stuff. Jimmy Bratcher's doing the electric. The greatest drummer you never heard of, a guy named Dale Z, is doing drums on that, and a profound bass player named James Albright is doing bass on it. Great players that came together and played my music. Dale Z wouldn't let me pay him. James Albright did it for a living, and I insisted that he let me pay him. But great guys that came together, and Jimmy not only played on that, but Jimmy produced that project, and he got music out of me I didn't know I had in me. Play my music anytime you want to, Bishop. You're quite welcome to do that. It seems to me that the Lord is looking to give us epiphanies. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We call them religiously, we'll call them revelations or a word or whatever we want to call them. But in fact, I believe that I believe that there's an eternal truth in our soul that's been varnished over by what we've been taught and what we've been exposed and what we've been told was correct and so on and so forth. But I believe there's an eternal truth in our soul that's looking to get out. It's always looking to get out, and epiphanies just make it so profound that it's undeniable. You can't ignore one of those things. You're exactly right. You can sit down and try to write something, a blog or a song, all you want to. But if it's not motivated by the Spirit, let me say that if you listen to my music, keep in mind that I wrote all of it when I was immersed in the evangelical movement. So my theology was very, very influenced by that. Mm-hmm. And I when I wrote a song, I'd always write a note out on the side of it. This is what I was thinking when I wrote this. This is what motivated this.
Oh, that's cool.
That music works now where I am now, almost all of it. I will tell you that I go back and hear that music now, and I hear layers and layers and layers of truth, not different from the original truth. The original truth is still there, but there are layers and layers and layers and layers of truth that I absolutely was not thinking at all when I wrote that music. I totally had no consciousness of it, can't take any credit for any of it. But when the Holy Spirit gives you an epiphany, it's not only going to be true for that moment, but it's going to be true for moments 10 years from now and 15 years from now and 20 years from now. Some of that music I wrote almost 30 years ago. My Religion, I wrote in the spring of 94. That's almost 30 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. And that's just one example. My Father's Son, I wrote in 2001.
That's a great song. I like that.
God Knows, I wrote, there's Jimmy, man. Good job finding him, man. Go listen to this brother. Download his stuff. He's
on Cross Rhythms. It calls him the blues singing Reverend. Reverend Jimmy Bratcher.
Yeah. Tell him Brother Bob sent you, and he won't send me any money. Just tell him that, okay? I want him to know I'm plugging him. He's a great brother. He and I played a lot of music together, and what he's doing now is just astounding. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm basically doing this because of your album. There's Reverend Jimmy Bratcher, Sunday the 18th, 9:30 a.m. Hey, come join Reverend Jimmy. That's what he's saying.
Yep.
Long hair and his blues guitar.
Tell you where his favorite concert is, by the way. The first Monday of every month. He goes down under a bridge along the Missouri River and plays a concert to the people that live under the bridges.
Yeah.
He gets in lockdown in major state prisons. He just did Louisiana. He's done Mississippi. He'll get into maximum security and play music. He's going boldly where most men won't go. He's a great brother. So I absolutely recommend him.
Even in my church history, you have people like Billy Sunday who went to bars and preached the gospel. You have people like the chaplain of Bourbon Street. I can't even remember his name, Ray.
I know you're talking about.
Yeah, and it's not the norm for churches. Now, I met a man in California when we lived there who was from Arkansas, and I can't think of his name, but he wore a priest's outfit. He was a Pentecostal preacher, and that was who he was. But he said, I would go to hospitals, and you don't have to do this, ladies and gentlemen, but he said, I would go to hospitals, and I would try to get in. They'd always tell me, no, you can't get in, and etc. And he said, one day I decided, you know what, there's a priest, and every time he goes, he's got that Catholic collar on. Every time he goes in, they don't say a word. He just goes right in. He said, so I started getting me, he said, I went and got me the Catholic black shirt and black suit and the tab collar. And from that point on, nobody ever messed with me. And so he got that, he began preaching, looking like a Catholic priest. And at the same time, he was just, yes, Bob Harrington. Thank you, Dr. Fay. Bob Harrington. The chaplain of Bourbon Street. But I love that brother. One of the best preachers I'd ever heard, but doing revivals looking like a Catholic. And that was unheard. Now, you're talking about probably 35, 40 years ago. maybe a little more than that in California, and an amazing experience. That was an epiphany for me. You know, I wear a collar, okay? I don't wear the Catholic collar, I wear a bishop's collar, but I always wanted to do that. You know why? It wasn't because back then I thought of myself as a bishop. It was because I go into places and people want to talk to me, one. And two, I just got tired of wearing a tie, and I always wanted, you know, we all get a part. You said when you got dressed that morning, you get put on a suit and went to church. You know, the fact is we think that's the norm. But it's okay to be outside the box. It's okay to be the most abnormal of people. Because I want to tell you who you're going to reach. You're going to reach the most abnormal of people. You're going to have an audience with them. And so I think it's different for all of us to be different, to be for the Lord to target us toward different cultures. Some things you wouldn't do, some things I wouldn't do, but in the middle of it, if I be lifted up, I'll draw all men, all peoples to myself. That's what the Lord is saying. And so for the Lord to do that, you've got to be willing to think outside the box. You've got to be willing to go outside the box and do what's normal. I remember preaching. My wife and I did what we called country days in this particular community we lived in. We did it for, I don't know, almost 10 years. I don't remember how many years, but we did it for a long time. And it wasn't putting on a suit and tie. It was down dressing. It was going to a park, people sitting on bales of hay. There was no air conditioning, no soft pews. And I also remember being asked to come to a beach party. So I go to this lake and this beach party, and I'm dressed in sandals and a flowery shirt or whatever, and I'm preaching to a crowd in a church group, as a matter of fact. But I'm preaching to everybody within the sound of my voice, and it's at a beach. No pulpit, nothing normal. I mean, totally. And I want to say that we don't do that enough. We do not do that enough. We're so stiff. I think the Old Testament called people like that stiff-necked. I think Jesus might have called them whitewashed sepulchres, stiff-necks. I think he also called them hypocrites and Pharisees and a few other things. But I just think we have to be willing to go outside the box. Do you think, and this is totally off the chart here, but do you think that epiphanies often happen to us, not number one, when we're not even thinking about it, these life experiences that are unexpected, but when we dare to step outside the box, that even greater epiphanies come to us?
You'll notice that none of the epiphanies that I've related to you happened inside a church building.
Yeah.
They weren't religious. I was thinking about when you asked me to start thinking about epiphany, and it came to meeting flow. And the most life-changing epiphany of my life. And I was thinking, well, how does that all fit? And the Lord said, you know what? I said it's not good for man to be alone before any of this other stuff was said. I mean, getting me the right woman in my life, which I desperately needed. She saved my life, by the way. I wrote a blog about that not long ago. Because I was Mach 3 with my hair on fire on a dead-end road when I met her, but I realized I couldn't have that lady on my arm and be that big a jerk. I had a choice I had to make. But absolutely, he gives them to us in the most unusual place. I want to read something I read that I think fits here, that I wrote several years ago in a blog I wrote called Welcome to Our Table, about the 5 years that I spent at McCoy's. I said, our table is a place of diversity. We are atheists and agnostics, Buddhists and believers, Catholics and charismatic, deacons and drinkers, LGBT and straight, preachers and prophets, thinkers and theologians. If you're religious, we'll offend you. If you're seeking truth, we'll join you. We'll eat, drink, and enjoy each other. We'll laugh often, cry some, and listen intentionally.
Yes.
Life is our agenda. There were many of us over the years. We'd come out and go at will with no strings attached, but forever attached by moments together, bread and situations, history and hope. We sought to serve our servers, and we always enjoyed their embrace. Servers loved service, by the way. I'd say to somebody, we've been taking this table for a long time. I said, we'll tip good, but we've been taking your table for a long time. That's their place of business, by the way. A table in a restaurant is that server's place of business. Invariably, they'd say, oh, no, we like to serve your group. They wanted that spirit. ownership would come to me and tell me how much they appreciated us coming in. It was a time of celebration and sincerity. You're welcome to our table. He prepares a table for us in the presence of our enemies. Because when you sit down at a table and break bread with somebody, they're not your enemy anymore. And sitting down at a table with someone who is completely diverse of you. And by the way, I wasn't exaggerating. We had regular interactions with everybody I listed there. Okay. Mm-hmm. Many of them are still my friends on social media, and I interact with them all the time. But when there's a table set and people sit down, by the way, it's okay to drink beer, Brother Bill, because he brews, right?
I always thought that was about coffee.
And by the way, I'm not a big beer drinker at all. The Flo will hand me a cold bottle of beer when I go outside to grill, so that's about once a month. And so I'm not pushing beer, but I'm just saying that stuff gets in the way, man. That kind of, oh my gosh, we can't do this. When I was sitting at that table, if somebody bought me a beer, I thanked them and drank it. I didn't drink a second one because I didn't need a second one. But we sat at that table and we had communion. That's what we really had. You know, I was with Francois Dutoit in Kansas City in 2014. I went to a session that he had and gave him a ride. We went downtown to a Pandora bread, and there were, I don't know, a dozen of us sitting there maybe at the table, and I was sitting across from Francois, and they brought us our food, and I looked at him and I said, "Brother, we're having communion." He said, "Absolutely we are." Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. See, communion isn't a wafer and a little cup of wine.
No.
It is breaking bread with your brothers. When Jesus really started breaking out, when he really started outing himself, one of the first things he did was go to a tax collector's house and break bread with him. Well, the first things he did, because what he was saying, and people, and the Pharisees and Sadducees are outside saying, "What's the matter with this guy?" But the people who'd been ignored by religion were saying, "Wow, this guy's sitting down." In that culture, having a meal with somebody was becoming one with them. It wasn't just a casual thing. And he prepares a table for us. Revelation tells us that there's a marriage supper. There's a table. Jimmy Bratcher, by the way, would absolutely assure you it's going to be barbecue, just for the record. He's a big barbecue guy. But there's a sharing of in Jesus culture, in the Arabic culture, if you break bread, if you eat from the same loaf of bread, you've become nourished by that same source of food. You've become one with each other to a level. The Lord prepares a table for us in the presence of our enemies because he wants us to be one with them. They aren't our enemy.
That's right.
We don't have any enemies.
Right.
We have people we don't know yet. We have people we haven't spiritually connected with yet. C.S. Lewis said, "You've never met a mere mortal." Every one of those people was created in the image of God. And they were created, by the way, he knew them by name before the foundations of the earth.
Right.
And they are here in front of you, next door to you, across the street from you, standing in line in front of you or behind you at the grocery store for such a time as this. I have a good friend, Brother Bartholomew out in California, who's a fairly liberal Episcopalian, by the way, but he wears his clerical collar around. I encourage him to. He was in a Dollar General store or something, in a grocery store a few months back, and a street guy was there, and behind him, and the street guy started ranting and raving about how long the line was taking and so on and so forth. And Brother David turned around to him and he said, "Brother, could I pitch in on your groceries?" He got real quiet for a moment. The guy said, could I get some other stuff? And David said, absolutely. Let's go back in the aisles. And they went back and picked out a bunch of more stuff and put in the basket. Came back up. The people in the line were still there. They wanted to see what was going on. It was like the prisoners in the jail when the earthquake came and shook the jail doors open. And I've played in a lot of prisons, and I've never met a prisoner whose ultimate goal wasn't to get out.
Mm-hmm.
But when the guard came and thought everybody had gotten away, Paul said, do yourself no harm. We're all still here. People knew the doors were open and they knew they could get out, but man, something had happened there that they didn't want to leave. They wanted to be around for it. They wanted to see what happened. But Brother David comes back to line with that brother, man, and everybody's still standing there. And he paid for his groceries and walked out. You can wear that clerical collar all you want to and preach all you want to, and you'll never have the profound effect that had that day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's a movement out there, brother. Sister Barbara Simons wrote this morning, she's wrote about the tithe. She said the tithe isn't money. It's the small percentage that are willing to take it to the next level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When I woke in the middle of the night, when I was still going to a Baptist church in 1980, early 81, I woke in the middle of the night and I felt compelled to pray. And when I started praying, I didn't understand what I was saying. And I didn't know what had happened. And I knew I couldn't go to my Baptist pastor and ask him about that, because the big movement from Dallas in those days was the gifts of the Spirit are not for today. But there was a Pentecostal pastor that lived across the street from me, and I ran into him at a gas station the next morning, Tommy Hyatt. And I went to him and I said, Brother Tommy, I had this experience last night. I woke up in the middle of the night and I felt compelled to pray. And when I started praying, I didn't understand what I was saying. And he said, I'll never forget what he said. It's a quote. He said, it's the manifestation of the filling of the Holy Spirit in your life. Don't be afraid of it. And don't get puffed up about it. There's something happening in us. Some of us, we didn't ask for it. We didn't seek it. No sane person would say, wow, I want to start saying things that get me kicked out of my church. I want to start saying things that have people who called me brother call me a heretic. I want to start saying and writing and doing things that I'm totally unfamiliar with, that don't align with anything I've been taught. Nobody in their right mind wants to do that. Except we can't not do it because we're compelled to do it. And it's what we're here for. And I tell that story because we shouldn't be afraid of it. Lord, help us not to get puffed up about it. Ego, by the way, is an acronym for edging God out. Don't get proud of yourself with this.
Yeah.
Be humbled by it. You know, wearing a collar in public, man, that isn't a status symbol. It's a responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, we're
Go ahead.
We're outside the box, and I can't find anywhere in Scripture, anywhere, where any of the guys that really made a difference were eager to do it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, man, I want to do this. The guys that wanted to do it got rebuked. The guys that really made a difference, the guys that were really hearing where it was all going for everybody. It's not just, we're not just being what we're getting is for everybody. It's for everybody, and it just happens for some reason or another. Maybe the Lord has given us a little piece that we're supposed to show a few people, but the message is for everybody, and that love and grace and mercy and insight and epiphanies that change your life for the better forever are available for everyone. And those of us that have them need to tell people it's okay for them to have them too.
Yes.
I consulted, I had a successful consulting practice for a number of years. And I would tell my clients, I'll never know more about your business than you already know. It'll never happen. You do it every day. You've been doing it every day for years. What I will do is I'm going to help you find out really good things that you know about your business that you don't know you know. And I'm going to tell you it's okay to do it. People paid me $1,000, $1,500 a day to do that. That's valuable. What the Lord's telling us to do, brother, is to go to the guy next door or across the street or in the line or the person you're talking to in customer service on the telephone. And when you see that you can say something to that person to free their spirit, maybe just a little bit, say it. It may be a scripture. It may not be a scripture. I love to end phone calls. I do it all the time. I'll call my bank or I'll for this or that or whatever. At the end of the conversation, I'll say, you've helped me today. What can I do for you? It's amazing the response I get.
Mm-hmm.
People have the image of God in them, in their DNA. And our job is to help them find that and tell them it's okay. That ain't religion, bro. That's way beyond religion. That doesn't fit in the box. Ark of the Covenant can't carry that. The building can't contain that. The Roman road is way too narrow a highway for that.
Yeah. And that's the thing, outside the box. In our culture, it's not the norm to minister outside the box, but it does happen, and it happens a lot more than we're aware of. And so I want to say next time, if as we're on track here, I want to talk about the epiphany of love, because you've had some experiences even beyond what we're talking about here today, that love is the key thing. Now, I want to tell you this about Jesus before we close, and I want to play one of Brother Bob's songs, or at least a little bit of it, is that Jesus would minister in synagogues, but it was usually confrontational. In other words, it wasn't the most comfortable place for him to be, because he was rejected because of who he was and because of what he represented. Uh, and so that was that's probably not even a good church experience, but he had great success ministering outside the church. Now, I'm not against church buildings, not against I don't attend a church, my wife and I, but we're not opposed to that. We've done this our whole lives. It's always been about church, but God help us that it's not been first about Jesus and about sharing Jesus with everybody we come in contact, because we've also done that. It didn't matter if we were at Walmart, if we were at a restaurant, if we were at a park or any public place. We've always been available to share about Jesus. And I think sometimes I've watched Christians, quote unquote, become quiet, become to themselves when they're not in the church setting, supported by other people who believe similar to them. And I think that it's really important that we be sensitive to Holy Spirit, and we experience, okay, what is he saying? What is he telling us? I like what you said about restaurants. My wife and I have anonymously, and sometimes it's not anonymously, but we've paid for other people's meals. We've been at the cash register and someone's checking out, and especially some single older lady by herself and no children there, and we've just stepped in front and said, hey, we'd like just add her bill to ours. It's okay to minister without bringing a hellfire and brimstone message, and I don't believe in hellfire and brimstone, but without bringing that kind of a deliberation to somebody. It's okay just to minister Jesus. And you know, one of the most famous quotes in our Christian history is, let your little light shine. Well, ladies and gentlemen, can I just say, let your little light shine, however you do it, whoever you do it to, let your little light shine. In other words, the light that's within you is the light of Christ. It's Jesus. Let Jesus out, because you can be the box that he is in that you refuse to let him out of. So I encourage you today. Brother Bob, thank you so much for being on today, and we're going to come back next week and talk more. But thank you so much. You're a good brother.
Love you, bro.
Love you too. All right, everybody. This is a song called My Religion. I'm going to see if we can pipe this through, and we'll just play a minute, minute and a half of it before we go off the air.
My religion isn't old time anymore. Jesus is who I'm living for. He's amazing grace and power. He's the man of the hour. My religion isn't old time anymore. Some say Jesus isn't for our time. Say we're so far gone that we're leaving him behind. They say we're living here and now. You better let me tell you how. 'Cause my religion isn't old time anymore. They're like Lazarus laying in the grave. His stinking flesh was far too gone to save. But when Jesus called him out, he hopped out with a shout. His religion wasn't old time anymore. Or like Paul and Silas locked up in jail. The earthquake came and made the jail doors fail. When they heard the jailer say, "How can I be saved?" His religion wasn't old time anymore.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching us. Please click like and click share. Join us next week. We plan to do all 4 of our weekly broadcasts. Go to the 2 links on in the chat room for Brother Bob's blogs and for his music. I appreciate all of you so much. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. If you want to partner with this ministry, the information is there on the screen. We love you, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everyone.
Be blessed.